It was February 14th, Valentine's Day in Cedar Grove, a day when love seems to permeate the air. For Jack and me, it was our first Valentine's together, and I wanted it to be perfect. I'd grown up in a small rural town far removed from these sorts of celebrations, so the whole experience felt like stepping into a dream. The streets were alive with the buzz of couples. Storefronts were adorned with hearts and red banners. Jack squeezed my hand as we weaved through the crowd, his eyes mirroring the excitement in mine. That's when we encountered her, the old woman. Her presence was like a shadow on a sunny day. She seemed out of place among the joy and vibrancy around us. Her clothes were ragged, clinging to her frail frame, and her face was unnaturally pale, almost ghostly. Yet it was the roses she held that truly caught our attention. They were a deep, mesmerizing red, so vivid they almost seemed to pulse with life. "These are beautiful," I found myself saying, almost in a trance. The woman didn't speak. Instead, she simply extended a bony hand, her fingers gnarled like the branches of an old tree. Jack, after a moment's hesitation, handed her a $10 bill. Her response was a chilling smile, one that seemed to hide 1,000 secrets. Then she disappeared into the crowd. We tried to shake off the eerie encounter and continued our evening. The roses, now in my possession, seemed to cast a strange aura. I noticed people glancing at them, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Back at my apartment, the roses found their place in an old vase. I remember feeling a wave of fatigue wash over me as I collapsed into bed, the events of the day catching up to me. But sleep didn't bring peace. Instead, I was tormented by nightmares, each more disturbing than the last. The scent of iron filled my nostrils, jolting me awake. It was coming from the roses. Approaching the vase, my heart pounding, I saw the dark liquid. It was like a scene from a horror movie. The roses were bleeding, and the blood seemed to seep into every corner of my room. Panicked, I reached out to touch the liquid, only to recoil in horror. It was warm, sticky, unmistakably real. Lights flickered on, casting my shadow across the room. I saw it then, my own reflection, pale and horrified, blood seeping from my eyes and hands. I woke up screaming, my body drenched in sweat. It took me a moment to realize it was a nightmare, but the terror lingered. The clock read 3 a.m., and sleep was now a distant hope. I sat by the roses, their beauty now a source of fear. The roses' tendrils reached out towards me, a scene straight out of a nightmare. But in that moment of sheer terror, my survival instincts kicked in. I managed to pull away, stumbling backwards. The roses, still in the vase, seemed to writhe with a life of their own. I screamed for help, my voice echoing through the empty apartment. In a panic, I grabbed the vase and hurled it against the wall. The vase shattered and the roses fell to the floor, now seemingly lifeless. The nightmare didn't end there. The room was filled with a sickening metallic scent. I could see stains on the carpet where the roses had bled. Shaking and sobbing, I called the police, my mind reeling from what had just happened. The police arrived, skeptical at first, but the evidence was there. The shattered vase, the strange stains, and my genuine distress. They took my statement and the remnants of the roses for analysis, but I knew they were as perplexed as I was. After that night, I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. I moved out, leaving behind the memories and the fear. Jack was a rock during that time, supporting me as I tried to piece together my life again. As for the old woman and her cursed roses, they became a mystery of Cedar Grove. Some said she was a ghost, a harbinger of doom. Others thought it was just an urban legend. But I knew the truth. I had come face to face with something unexplainable, something deeply sinister. Months passed, and Valentine's Day returned. I heard rumors about the old woman being seen again, offering her roses to unsuspecting lovers. But this time, I was far from Cedar Grove, trying to forget. Despite the distance, the memory of that night lingered. I often wondered about the old woman and the roses. Were they just an instrument of fear, or was there something more to them? The truth remained hidden, shrouded in the mystery that enveloped Cedar Grove. In the end, I was left with more questions than answers, but one thing was certain. I had survived an encounter that was beyond the realm of the ordinary, and it had changed me forever. The story of the Valentine's Day roses would always be a part of me, a chilling reminder of the night when the line between reality and nightmare blurred. It was February 14th, a cold winter night. I stood alone at the transfer point between Line 1 and Line 2 at Grand Central Station. It had been 3 years since I started this ritual, coming here every Valentine's Day, waiting, hoping. You see, 3 years ago, I was a different person, a shy college student, not the type who would catch someone's eye. Valentine's Day wasn't for girls like me. That night, I wandered into a Barnes & Noble, lost myself in the aisles of books, only realizing how late it had gotten when I glanced at my watch. Rushing to the subway, I debated my route. Usually I'd transfer at Times Square, but that night, on a whim, I decided to switch at Grand Central. Why? I still don't know. Grand Central was quiet at that hour. The red clock above the platform read 11:00 p.m. As I waited, a faint, sweet scent drifted through the air. Then he walked past me, a tall man in a dark blue coat. I only caught a glimpse of his jet-black hair. As he turned left, I instinctively went right. But as fate would have it, we met face to face in the middle of the station. The scent of sandalwood enveloped me, and for a brief moment I saw his face. Pale under the dim lights, his slow blinking eyes seemed to recognize me, but I was sure we'd never met. Our eyes locked, and I felt my heart race for the first time. Then, a gust of wind, a dropped chocolate bar, and I stumbled over the safety line just as a train roared into the station. The next thing I knew, his strong arms had pulled me to safety. "Thank you," I murmured, my cheeks burning. He just nodded, eyeing the chocolate bar. He didn't even notice when the train left. I offered him the chocolate, suddenly shy about its romantic implications. He accepted it, curious. "Is it good?" "The best," I replied, wondering if this was what happiness felt like. We exchanged names. His was Michael, a rare surname he joked. We realized we were both headed in the same direction and decided to wait for the next train together. That was how it all began. Our relationship grew in those subway stations and late-night walks. He was always busy during the day, so nighttime was our time. The next Valentine's Day, we met again at Grand Central. He proposed a game to walk in opposite directions around the station and see who'd reach the other side first. Reluctantly, I agreed. Minutes passed, but he didn't show. I searched the station, growing more frantic with each empty train that passed. Finally, I left, heartbroken, a whisper in my ear. I was first. I've returned every year since, hoping to find him, to understand why he disappeared. Tonight, as the station began to close, I boarded the last train on Line 1, heading towards the end of the line. For the first time, I sat in the front car, watching the darkness ahead. The train seemed to crawl, the tunnel ahead endless. Then, shockingly, a man in a blue coat appeared on the tracks. Was it Michael? But as quickly as he appeared, the train passed right through him. "I was first," the words echoed in the empty car. I turned to see the driver, a man in a dark blue coat, smiling slowly. The train jolted, lights flickered off, and the scent of sandalwood grew overpowering. When the lights returned, we were at an unknown station. The sign read a name I recognized, not far from Grand Central, but I knew no such station existed on Line 1. Days later, a small news article reported a tragic accident at Grand Central. A girl had fallen onto the tracks. As I reflect on these events, I wonder if I'll ever understand what happened. But every Valentine's Day, I find myself drawn back to that station, to the memory of Michael and the mystery that remains unsolved. For 27 years, I've lived a life so ordinary it's almost dull. I run a small independent music and movie store in a sleepy town. It's my sanctuary, filled with vinyl records, classic movie posters, and the occasional visitor seeking nostalgia. My life was a series of habits and routines until one night changed everything. That night, I went out with some old friends to a local bar. As the music blared and the night grew long, I spotted an old schoolmate from across the room. We exchanged pleasantries and promised to meet up again, though deep down I knew we probably wouldn't. I've always kept my distance from deep connections. To me, relationships seemed like complicated messes. Movies in my store came and went, and so did people. That's how I liked it, no strings attached. Leaving the bar, slightly tipsy, I wandered the streets. The night air was crisp, the kind that sobers you up a bit. I meandered down the familiar streets, lost in thought, until something unusual caught my eye. In a dimly lit part of the street, I stumbled over a small, trembling creature. It was a dog, white and seemingly lost, its eyes reflecting the streetlights like tiny red gems. There was something captivating, almost otherworldly, about its gaze. Against my better judgment, I took the shivering animal home. That night, as the dog curled up on my couch, I couldn't help but feel an odd sense of companionship that had been missing from my life. The next day, my life took a turn for the surreal. I woke up late, nursing a hangover, only to find my usually messy apartment spotlessly clean. My old, dusty records were organized, and there was a small pot of fresh daisies on the coffee table. And then I saw her. A woman with striking features and clear, bright eyes, standing in my living room. "Good morning," she greeted me cheerfully. Startled, I demanded to know who she was and how she got into my apartment. Her reply was even more baffling. She claimed that I had brought her home the previous night. Confused and wary, I offered her money, thinking maybe I had made a terrible drunken mistake. She laughed off my offer and instead handed me a bowl of homemade soup. Her presence, although uninvited, didn't feel threatening. It was as if she had always been a part of the apartment, a part of my life. As the days passed, the woman who introduced herself as Sophie became a constant in my life. She cooked, cleaned, and even rearranged the store to make it more appealing. Her laughter filled the quiet spaces of my life I didn't even realize were empty. Sophie never talked much about her past. She had an air of mystery, a sense that she was hiding something significant, yet she was open and honest in every other way. Our relationship remained platonic, though not for lack of interest on my part. There was something about her that held me back, a deep-seated caution or perhaps fear of what she might truly be hiding. One evening, while closing the store, I found her looking through old photo albums, her expression a mix of nostalgia and sadness. "Sometimes I wish I could go back," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "Go back where?" I asked. "To a place where I once belonged," she said, quickly changing the subject. Days turned into weeks, and Sophie's presence in my life became something I depended on. She brought a sense of warmth and care that I hadn't realized I was missing. But her mysterious past always lingered in the back of my mind. One night, while out with friends, I saw Sophie talking intimately with a man at the bar. Jealousy surged through me, an emotion I hadn't felt in years. I confronted her, and she just smiled sadly, saying, "You don't understand, James. There are parts of my life I can't share, not yet." Her words stung. I started to question everything about her, her sudden appearance in my life, her reluctance to talk about her past, her inexplicable ways. The doubt and confusion began to erode the trust and affection I had for her. Finally, one rainy evening, I asked her to leave. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. She didn't protest. She just packed her things quietly and left me standing in the doorway, watching her disappear into the night. Weeks passed, and the void Sophie left was palpable. I missed her laughter, her quirky habits, the way she made my dull life brighter. But pride and confusion kept me from reaching out to her. Then, one ordinary afternoon, she returned. She looked different, tired, worn out. She explained that she had been trying to reconcile with her past, to confront the ghosts that haunted her. But she realized that the only place she felt at home was with me. I was taken aback, unsure of how to respond. All the feelings I had tried to suppress came flooding back. "Stay," I found myself saying. "Please, stay." From that day on, Sophie became more than a mysterious stranger. She became my confidant, my closest friend, and eventually much more than that. We shared our pasts, our fears, our dreams. In her, I found a kindred spirit, someone who understood the solitude and complexity of my soul. Our story isn't one of grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It's about finding love in the most unexpected places, about two people with hidden depths and pasts coming together to create a future neither thought possible. Sophie never did fully reveal her past. There were parts of her life she kept locked away, but in her eyes, I saw the truth, that wherever her journey had begun, it was with me she found her home. En de decision titon sititen and that stemmed sit as that it, and that was enough for both of us. I remember that Valentine's Day vividly. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening, but little did I know it would change my life forever. I was always the quiet type, preferring solitude over company. Ever since my parents' messy divorce when I was 16, I became even more withdrawn. My dad tried his best to keep in touch, but it was tough with him living on the other side of the country. And my mum, well, she was busy with her new life, her new husband, who, despite his efforts, never really became part of my world. I took a job at a local advertising firm right after graduating college, determined to carve out my own path. I moved into a quaint little apartment on Elm Street, a quiet place, far from the hustle and bustle of downtown. But that Valentine's Day, something peculiar happened. My mom, who owned a men's clothing store downtown, was swamped with work and asked for my help. As I was sorting through a batch of new shirts, a whimsical idea struck me. I scribbled a note. "If you find this, maybe it's fate. I'm a bit of a loner, but I have dreams too. If you're a single guy, would you like to play along? Here's my number," and tucked it into the pocket of a white shirt. That night I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Grace. It's Michael. Happy Valentine's Day. I think we might be fated to meet. Can we?" His voice was charming, and something about this unexpected adventure intrigued me. We agreed to meet at the corner of Elm and Oak. There, I found him, standing with a bunch of roses, just like in some romantic movie. Michael was nothing like I had imagined. He was charming, witty, and disarmingly handsome. That night, after returning home, I was on cloud 9. But as I was drifting off to sleep, a strange noise jolted me awake. It was the sound of footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate steps that seemed to hover just outside my door. My heart pounded against my chest. Who could it be? The next-door apartment had been empty for weeks. The next day at work, I mentioned the incident to my colleague, David. His reaction was odd, a mix of disbelief and fear. That apartment building has some history, he said hesitantly. But before I could press further, he quickly changed the subject. Things escalated quickly after that. The footsteps became a nightly occurrence, always stopping right outside my door. And then the unsettling dreams started. Vivid, haunting nightmares that left me waking up in a cold sweat. I confronted David again. This time, he relented. The previous tenant, there was an accident. A young woman, it was tragic. His words sent chills down my spine. Had her spirit returned seeking something or someone? But then another shock came. Michael disappeared. Calls went straight to voicemail. No one at the coffee shop where we first met knew him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Haunted by his absence and the eerie occurrences in my apartment, I decided to investigate. Digging into the building's history, I uncovered a chilling past, a tale of love, betrayal, and a curse that lingered through the years. As I delved deeper, I realized that Michael's sudden appearance and disappearance, the footsteps, the nightmares, they were all pieces of a complex puzzle, interwoven with the tragic history of the apartment and its previous inhabitants. In the end, I found out that Michael was the grandson of the woman who had died in my apartment. He had grown up with stories of the curse and had come to find out if they were true. But after meeting me, he couldn't go through with his plan to scare me away. He left to protect me, to spare me from the curse he believed in so fervently. The footsteps and nightmares stopped as suddenly as they had begun, leaving me with more questions than answers. Had Michael's presence awakened something, or was it all just a series of strange coincidences? I never saw Michael again, but I often wonder about him and the mysterious legacy of my once haunted home. In a way, the experience opened my eyes to the mysteries that lurk just beneath the surface of our ordinary lives, and to the possibility of love in the most unexpected places. The story of the haunted house taught me that sometimes the ghosts of our past can be more real than we ever imagined, and sometimes they lead us to a future we never saw coming. Valentine's Day always brought a mix of emotions to our small town, a blend of sweet romance and the stark reminder of loneliness for those without a partner. This year, though, Valentine's Day was overshadowed by a mystery that seemed straight out of a detective novel. My name is Alex, and as a junior editor at the local newspaper, my life was a cycle of deadlines and coffee. That day, as I sat sifting through emails and ad requests, my colleague Lauren caught my eye. She always did, with her easy smile and the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating. I had never mustered the courage to ask her out, settling instead for stolen glances and brief exchanges. The routine of the day was disrupted when Lily, a friend from the sports section, approached me, her voice tinged with worry. "Have you seen my brother, James? He didn't come home last night, and he's not answering his phone." I hadn't, and her concern was infectious. James was known to be reliable, and his sudden disappearance was out of character. As the day progressed, the usual buzz of the newsroom was replaced by a sense of unease. Valentine's Day, a day typically filled with heart-shaped chocolates and last-minute flower purchases, felt different. The turning point came when my boss handed me an obituary to process. "Henry Hughes, 22 years old. Apparent suicide," he said, his expression somber. I glanced at the photo. A young man with a thoughtful look, someone who seemed familiar yet distant. As I read through the sparse details, a cold shiver ran down my spine. There was something unsettling about this obituary, something that didn't add up. Driven by a nagging curiosity, I decided to delve into our archives during my lunch break. What I found was nothing short of astonishing. An obituary for Henry Hughes, dated February 14th, from the previous year, and the year before that, each with a different cause of death, but always 22 years old. Confusion and intrigue swirled in my mind. Was this some twisted prank, or was there a darker truth behind these recurring obituaries? I needed to know more. My investigation led me to an old, decrepit house on the edge of town. The air inside was stale, and the silence was oppressive. The house felt like a mausoleum, preserving the memories of someone long gone. In the corner, a stack of VHS tapes caught my attention. Each was labeled with a date, all February 14th, spanning over a decade. With a growing sense of dread, I played the most recent tape. The footage was grainy, but the image was clear enough. It was Henry, looking more gaunt and hollow than in his photograph. His voice was barely a whisper as he spoke to the camera. "It's Valentine's Day again, the 13th one since it all began," he said, his eyes reflecting a deep unspoken pain. He then proceeded to cut his wrist, and as the blood flowed, his body slumped to the floor. The timestamp read 1:40 p.m. The same time Lily had approached me earlier about her missing brother. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Could there be a connection between James's disappearance and this mysterious Henry Hughes? I sat there, stunned, trying to piece together the puzzle. Henry's haunting words echoed in my mind, the 13th one since it all began. What began? And who was he speaking to? My journalistic instincts kicked in. I had to dig deeper. I decided to visit the local library to search on newspapers and public records. Hours of research led me to a startling discovery. Henry Hughes was reported missing 13 years ago on February 14th, the same day his girlfriend tragically died in a car accident. They were both 22. The pieces started to fit together in a macabre puzzle. Every Valentine's Day since his disappearance, an obituary for Henry appeared in our newspaper, each time with a different cause of death. It was as if he was reliving his demise year after year. But why? And how was James connected to all this? My mind raced with theories. A love triangle gone wrong, a secret identity, a vendetta. I decided to pay a visit to the address listed in Henry's old records. The house was in a state of neglect, with overgrown weeds and peeling paint. As I cautiously stepped inside, the air felt thick with the remnants of a life once lived. Dusty photographs, old letters, and more tapes filled the room. Each tape was a Valentine's Day confession from Henry, each more despairing than the last. He spoke of his undying love for his deceased girlfriend and his guilt for surviving the accident that claimed her life. He believed he was cursed to live in a loop, reliving his death every year on the anniversary of her passing. The last tape was different, though. Henry's tone was resigned, almost peaceful. He spoke of a plan to break the cycle, to finally find rest. And then the screen went black. A noise from the back of the house startled me, and I cautiously made my way towards it. There, in a dimly lit room, I found James, disoriented but alive. He muttered about a man who looked like Henry, who had lured him here with stories of a curse and a lost love. We left the house, the mystery of Henry Hughes still unsolved. Was he a tormented soul, trapped in a cycle of death and rebirth? Or was it all the delusions of a broken man? Back at the newspaper office, I sat at my desk, contemplating the day's events. The phone rang. It was Lily, relieved and crying, thanking me for finding James. Valentine's Day ended not with the expected fanfare of romance, but with a haunting tale of love, loss, and the inexplicable. Henry Hughes remained a mystery, a ghost story that would be whispered about for years to come. And as for me, I learned that sometimes the most compelling stories are those without clear answers, those that leave us wondering and searching in the shadows. It was Valentine's Day, and the city was alive with young love. I remember it like it was yesterday. My girlfriend, Amy, and I had just left the movie theater, her arms filled with roses I'd given her. The night was ours, and I, feeling bold, suggested, "It's still early. Let's go for a drive." It was a chilly night, the kind where you can see your breath in the air, but we were too caught up in the moment to care. The streets were ours, the city lights blurring past us like stars as we drove. Amy laughed, urging me to go faster, her excitement infectious. After hours of driving, we returned to my apartment. It was freezing inside. I'd forgotten to leave the heating on. We crashed on the sofa, the events of the night spinning in my head, and soon fell asleep. That's when the nightmare began. In my dream, I heard a voice, teasingly asking, "Which eye do you prefer, left or right?" It was playful, but chilling. I woke with a start, only to find the room exactly as we'd left it. Amy was still sleeping peacefully beside me. I shook off the dream and went to get a glass of water. The apartment felt eerie, shadows seeming to shift in the corners of my eyes. I told myself it was just the after effects of the dream. But then Amy started talking in her sleep, saying things she couldn't possibly know, things about an accident, a couple hurt by a speeding car. My heart raced as I realized she was talking about us. We had been driving recklessly, but surely we hadn't. I shook her awake, and she looked at me, confused. "Did you have a weird dream?" I asked. She nodded, describing the same chilling scenario. We tried to laugh it off, but uneasy lingered. We decided to go back to sleep, but the dreams continued. This time, we both saw a couple, their faces twisted in pain and anger, accusing us of ruining their lives. The next morning, we decided to take a walk, trying to shake off the nightmares. That's when we saw the news headline on a coffee shop TV. Tragic Valentine's night accident. Couple injured by speeding car. Amy and I exchanged a look of horror. The dream, the news. It couldn't be a coincidence. We had to know. We went to the police station and asked about the accident. The officer's description matched our dream exactly. A couple, out for a Valentine's walk, had been struck by a speeding car. The driver had fled the scene. Guilt overwhelmed us. We confessed, expecting to be arrested, but the officer looked at us, puzzled. "That accident happened last year," he said. "The driver was caught and sentenced. You couldn't have been involved." We left the station, our minds reeling. How could we dream of an event we had no knowledge of? And why did it feel like a warning? To this day, Amy and I can't explain what happened. Was it just a bizarre coincidence, our subconscious minds picking up on a forgotten news story, or something more? We may never know, but one thing is certain: we never drove recklessly again. That Valentine's Day changed us. It taught us that life is fragile, and every action has consequences, sometimes reaching far beyond what we can see or understand. Being the center of attention was never my goal, but somehow it became my reality. My name is Emily, and my transformation story is one that still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. It all started when I was 25, a time when love was just a distant dream for me. Back then, I was overweight and struggled with my skin tone. Although I had a pretty face, it was never enough. Guys would turn away at first glance, making romance an elusive dream, but I was never one to sulk in self-pity. I believed that success didn't hinge on looks alone. Hard work and a joyful spirit were my mantras. My perspective on life took a sharp turn with the arrival of a new colleague, Michael. He was the epitome of charm, the proverbial knight in shining armor. I couldn't help but fall for him. We grew close, becoming friends who could talk about anything and everything. He once mentioned loving my genuine smile. That compliment meant the world to me. A year of friendship later, I gathered the courage to confess my feelings. It was Valentine's Day, a day celebrated worldwide but with a unique fervor here in the West. I took the day off, dressed in my best outfit, and bought a thoughtful gift. We had dinner and watched a movie. It was a perfect evening until the moment of truth arrived. Standing outside my house, I handed him the gift and confessed, "Michael, I've liked you for a long time. Will you be my boyfriend?" The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the words that crushed me. "Emily, let's just be friends." He said he couldn't date someone who didn't fit his physical ideal. Heartbroken, I watched him walk away. That rejection sparked a desperate desire to change. I scoured the internet for weight loss and skin lightening tips, but nothing worked. It was either ineffective or temporary. Then, during a long weekend, a message popped up on Facebook from a stranger. "Want to get slim and fair quickly? I have a method. You'll see results in a week." Desperation led me to reply, "Yes, tell me. I'll do anything." The method was grotesque, involving strict diets and rigorous exercise regimes bordering on the extreme. Hesitant yet driven by the desire to be with Michael, I followed it. Post-holiday, I returned to work, my transformation astounding everyone. Michael couldn't believe his eyes. I confessed my feelings again, and this time he accepted. One evening, I invited him over for a special dinner. "It's a significant day," I told him. He arrived to an array of dishes, the aroma filling the room, but as he had tea, I didn't touch a bite. Suddenly, he felt dizzy and collapsed. When he awoke, he found himself tied up, fear evident in his eyes. "Emily, what's going on?" he stammered. "The special ingredient," I began, my voice cold, "is something unconventional." I revealed the horrifying truth of my transformation, a dangerous cocktail of illegal drugs and extreme diets that pushed my body to the brink. Michael looked at me, horror-struck. "Why?" "Because I wanted to be beautiful for you," I whispered. But the horror didn't end there. In my twisted state, I had planned to make him a part of my dark journey. It was then I revealed the final ingredient of my transformation, a rare and illegal substance that promised eternal youth at a terrible cost. As I approached him with a sinister intent, he struggled in vain. But before I could enact my final plan, the police burst in. An anonymous tip had led them to my doorstep. The aftermath was a blur. The truth about my transformation and the illegal substances became a media sensation. As I was led away in handcuffs, I saw Michael's face, a mix of relief and disbelief. In prison, I often reflect on my actions. The quest for beauty and acceptance led me down a dark path, one that I'll forever regret. The haunting thought lingers. How far are we willing to go for acceptance and love? And so my story serves as a cautionary tale. Beauty at the cost of one's soul is a curse, not a blessing. Remember, true beauty lies within, and no transformation is worth losing yourself over. As unbelievable as this story may sound, it's something I actually experienced. Under different circumstances, I might not have believed it myself. But in that moment, in that setting, I couldn't help but believe it was real. Even afterwards, I often wondered if it was all just a dream, a figment of my imagination, spurred by my own emotional state. Yet every detail remains so vivid in my mind, it feels impossible to dismiss it as mere fantasy. Here's what happened. Valentine's Day was still a few weeks away. The holiday season had passed, and with it so had my relationship. This year, it looked like I was going to spend Valentine's Day alone. To be honest, I wasn't too upset about it. Being alone seemed more interesting than the predictable routine of a couple's celebration. However, I couldn't shake off the gloom that had settled over me since the breakup. My days were spent in a haze of routine activities, smoking generic cigarettes, sipping cappuccino, playing video games, and reading novels by popular Western authors. These were all things my ex enjoyed, and in a way, immersing myself in them was my method of moving on. During my college break, I spent my time writing and freelancing, what you might call a digital nomad. I liked this lifestyle. It was free, and being sick didn't mean worrying about missing classes. This freedom was especially comforting now as I nursed my broken heart. Lately, I found myself browsing through social media and chatting apps late into the night. It was said that the late hours were when people were most vulnerable and open. However, whenever I brought up my recent breakup, the conversation would fizzle out, leaving me more isolated than before. Eventually, I gave up on the idea of finding solace online. Instead, I turned to the city itself for comfort. I've always had a fondness for New York, not because it was my hometown, it wasn't, but because of its subway, particularly the one at Grand Central Station. The subway there was old and had a peculiar charm. The entrances were deep and steep, with a wind that always seemed to howl through them, giving me an odd sense of foreboding. I often imagined that such a place could harbor secrets, maybe even ghosts. One evening, as I was heading home through the subway, I noticed her, a young woman sitting on the railing by the entrance, swinging her legs. She had long, unkempt hair and wore a red coat with knee-high boots. Something about her struck me as peculiar, almost out of place. Over the next few nights, I saw her again and again. Each time she seemed to be watching me, a cryptic smile playing on her lips. Eventually, she waved me over. I approached, curious yet cautious. "Hi," she greeted me. "Hi," I replied. "You're here alone." "Yeah, I'm always here alone," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "It's almost Valentine's Day," I remarked, trying to make conversation. "Oh, is it?" "I've lost track of time," she responded, looking away. We talked for a while, about trivial things at first, but as the conversation deepened, she revealed something startling. "Last year, I died, right here at this subway station. I just collapsed and never woke up," she said, her eyes not meeting mine. I paused, not sure how to respond. Her statement was so unexpected, so out of the ordinary. Yet, looking into her eyes, I saw a depth of sadness that made me believe her. "I used to come here every evening, waiting for my boyfriend. We'd take the subway home together. But one day I just couldn't breathe. And that was it," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to dismiss her story as a fanciful tale. But another part, perhaps influenced by my recent heartbreak, felt a strange connection to her. "Would you do me a favor?" she suddenly asked. "My boyfriend. He still takes this subway. I see him pass by, but he never sees me. I just want to talk to him one last time." I agreed, albeit hesitantly. The next day, as her boyfriend approached the subway entrance, I stopped him. "Excuse me, are you Jack?" I asked, using the name she had given me. And the man looked puzzled, but nodded. "Yeah, that's me. Do I know you?" "There's a girl named Kara," I began. "She says she used to wait for you here every evening." Jack's face turned pale. "Kara, but she passed away last year. How do you know about her?" I explained how I'd met Kara. or at least someone who claimed to be her. Jack listened, his expression a mix of disbelief and sorrow. When I finished, he stood silently staring at the spot where Kara often sat. "I wish I could see her just one more time," he murmured. That evening, as I returned to the subway, Kara was there, waiting. "Did you talk to him?" she asked eagerly. I nodded, recounting my conversation with Jack. As I spoke, Kara's expression shifted from hope to sadness. "I just wanted him to know that I'm still here, that I never left him," she said softly. Our nightly conversations became a routine. Kara would share stories about her life, her dreams, and her time with Jack. With each tale, I felt more drawn to her ethereal presence, her story a bittersweet reminder of love lost. Valentine's Day arrived, and I found myself at the subway entrance, waiting for Kara. She appeared, her usual spot by the railing, her smile tinged with melancholy. "Today's the day, isn't it?" she said. "The day of love." "Yeah, it is," I replied. "Do you miss it being alive, I mean?" "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I'm still here in a way. I can see the world, even if it can't see me." As we talked, the reality of her situation and mine sank in. Kara was a memory, a ghost lingering in a place she once loved, and I, a heartbroken writer, had found comfort in her company, a connection with someone who understood loss. That night, as I left the subway, Kara's figure slowly faded into the shadows, her final words echoing in my mind. "Thank you for listening to me, for seeing me when no one else could." Kara never appeared again after that night, but her story stayed with me, a haunting reminder of the love and loss that Valentine's Day can bring. And as for me, I learned that sometimes the most profound connections are the ones we least expect, found in the quiet corners of our everyday lives.